Hello guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another edition of Let's Talk Chelsea. Hope you're doing well and keeping safe on this Tuesday. Got a few uploads today. Firstly, talking about the inside story of how Frank Lampard was sacked at Chelsea from The Athletic, and also Matt Law in the Telegraph. Two very in-depth and revealing pieces. Got quite a bit to say on that. And then the other uploads today are going to be about Thomas Tuchel, trying to look forward for Chelsea for the rest of the season under Tuchel arriving at Stamford Bridge. One of those videos is going to be looking at the history of Tuchel, what he can bring to Chelsea, what has he done previously, and also reacting to the announcement and maybe his first press conference. We'll have to wait and see. We know he's likely to be announced today, just waiting to see when that will happen. So make sure you don't miss any of the uploads going forward by hitting that notification bell, and also of course hitting that subscribe button. Also hit the like button if you're enjoying the content, because it helps out the channel as well. So let's get into it. So two very in-depth pieces yesterday that many people have reacted to. Firstly, from The Athletic, their in-depth piece sort of telling all about Frank Lampard's time as Chelsea's manager and basically what went wrong. Lampard's Chelsea sacking, tension with Marina, unhappy players and secret job offers. And the second one from Matt Law in the Telegraph, similar tone to it, player clashes, ruthless appraisals and contract details. The inside story of Frank Lampard's Chelsea sacking. So both pieces, I guess, go over similar ground in different ways. They go into different details. I think both are very interesting, very revealing. The Athletic piece has a lot of contributors, and I suggest, as I always do, please go and read these pieces because they give you a lot of detail, they give you a lot of information, and I think wherever you stand, it's very revealing about where Chelsea sit currently, where things went wrong with Lampard, and where we find ourselves now moving forward with the club in 2021. So firstly, let's look at the Athletic article. So these were the main points, as you can see on your screen now, that were sort of broken down in the article. Big ones in here: Lampard's relationship with influential director Marina Granovskaia deteriorated. The fact that Ralf Rangnick was offered an interim job for the rest of the season but turned it down. Calls were made in recent weeks to sound out Julian Nagelsmann before deal was struck with Tuchel. Leicester game was the tipping point, and morning after spent trying to finalise successor. Lampard shook the players' hands and thanked them for their efforts under him after the Leicester defeat. Some players complained about lack of tactical instruction and not being spoken to for months. Desire to re-sign Declan Rice annoyed his bosses. The dressing room felt managers showed no empathy and were hurt by his public criticism. And finally, Lampard would have walked out if he had been working for any other club other than Chelsea. I feel like that final point there is the most shocking from that article, because I think it shows you how deep-rooted these problems were, and the fact that last summer, after the first season, 1920, when there was positivity, when there was excitement, when it felt like Chelsea were moving in a good direction under Frank Lampard, they were backing him financially in the transfer window, that there were problems. There were already problems there, and the fact that Lampard could have walked last summer, I think, tells you a lot about the strain and pressure he was already under, despite sort of externally we didn't feel that. We felt, of course, this season was going to be a lot different to last season, but the idea he was already on the brink, I think, tells you a lot, and it reveals a lot about the problems we've seen recently. I think it really does. So it puts things into wider context and sort of the picture. I feel that the first half of this piece, I guess, comes from player sources, maybe their sort of side of the story where things went wrong. I'd say the first half of the Athletic piece is sort of why Lampard got sacked, or at least the club perspective of why, sort of justifying his sacking and what Lampard did wrong. The fact that apparently he didn't speak to players who didn't play for him, basically outcast players, the bloated squad clearly being a problem here, and also other things, the lack of tactical instruction. We spoke about Lampard's tactics and being a inexperienced coach and having that difficulty at especially a big club too, so that comes into it as well. The second half is Lampard's, I think, side of the story, and as we say with all of this, there are two sides to the story. We weren't in the room for a lot of these conversations, for the conflict between players. We don't know what really went on, and unless Frank Lampard in the future makes a book, that's only going to be his side of the story, of course. You need to take everything with a pinch of salt too, but this does come from very reliable sources, and I think it just says a lot, and actually is quite damning for me about the culture at Chelsea Football Club currently, because that's what I take away from this piece, not necessarily just on Lampard, as I've been saying recently. I think what I take away from this is it being an unworkable environment for a head coach at Chelsea Football Club. I really think it is absolutely unworkable moving forward, and that's what I fear for Tuchel as well, and I fear for any coach, and I think it's what a lot of fans, including myself, have feared for a number of years internally about the unrealistic expectations of this club at times and the feeling of contradiction. I think that's the thing that annoyed me whilst I was reading through this piece, of so many times reading things and going, you're asking him to do this thing, but you're also asking him to do that thing. They contradict each other. Player power and politics playing such a role in the conflict here that just is worrying to me, because it seems like at times Chelsea and people higher up in Chelsea are more interested in saving face in terms of not looking silly in the transfer window than maybe even progressing the club. And that's something that I think is going to butt heads with coaches that come in over and over again. And even if we didn't know in the past, you can imagine why Jose Mourinho fell out with this board. You can imagine why Antonio Conte fell out with this board. You understand why Maurizio Sarri left pretty swiftly as well. And the same with Frank Lampard. It paints such a broad picture. The fear of re-signing Declan Rice for me is just absolutely stupid. It made me laugh actually in just disbelief, because this is the same club that re-signed Nemanja Matic in 2014, that re-signed David Luiz in 2016. Chelsea do have previous with this, and the idea that we could look a little bit silly for re-signing a player that could improve the current head coach's vision, I think says a lot, and it concerns me, because then I look at the other side where fringe underperforming players causing Frank Lampard issues. I said this on transfer deadline day, the issue Chelsea had with shipping off a load of the players who were unwanted, whether that was Antonio Rudiger, Kepa Arrizabalaga, Marcos Alonso, even Jorginho, I think you could throw in there as well, Emerson too, but of course I think we had to keep one of those left backs, but still unwanted players. And the idea then, I remember saying this in a video, sort of just passing off, that could they cause issues for Lampard behind the scenes, and it seems like they have. And not only does the Athletic piece describe that, Matt Law's piece describes that as well. Kepa Arrizabalaga for me is the biggest one here, and this is not having a go at personally at Kepa. I think all the abuse he's received, any player getting abuse, I always say it's absolutely unwarranted. I think it's disgusting. I never support it, but there is obviously criticism and abuse here, and it's very different. And I think just the concept that Frank was being criticised, and apparently the conflict with Marina here about Kepa and not treating Kepa fairly. I actually think, Frank gave a lot of chances to Kepa Arrizabalaga. And once again, it's this conflict of Chelsea demanding Champions League qualification. Frank Lampard, in that Wolves game, the final game of the Premier League season in 1920, instead played Willy Caballero. We got a clean sheet. We got through. I know obviously Man United won the game, and really our result against Wolves was a bit irrelevant. But I think it shows you once again how confusing it must be and stressful it must be for a head coach at Chelsea, knowing and being pulled in different directions, of being told you have to get Champions League football, but there's this player who's really underperforming that is costing you goals. Statistically, is one of the worst keepers in Premier League history, but you need to play him because we spent so much on him, and if you don't, that's going to cause more friction. But you also need to get Champions League football, and this keeper could cost you Champions League football. Just listening to it, it blows your mind. It really does. And I feel sorry for coaches if that's the environment they have to deal with. Matt Law's piece as well talks about last season, which I think for a lot of Chelsea fans and for a lot of people outside the club were very impressed by what Lampard did last season in difficult circumstances, but apparently wasn't enough for the club themselves. And this is what Matt Law has to say. Even a 42-year-old who played under 10 different Blues managers would have been taken aback by the ruthless nature of the Chelsea hot seat after it became clear that Champions League qualification and an FA Cup final at the end of his first season in charge was viewed as a passable achievement rather than any sort of success within the club. Rather than being called in to discuss his impressive work with the club's academy graduates or extending his contract into its third year, Lampard was left in no doubt that fourth place would never be considered good enough for Abramovich's Chelsea, no matter the circumstances. And context is everything, right? It's not about high standards. To me, this is unrealistic expectations. You back a young manager, he brings in untested young players, and he gets us Champions League football at a very difficult moment. And still, that isn't even considered good enough or considered a great thing in terms of last season, what Lampard was able to do, take us through that rocky period, still retain Champions League football. This is the thing I'm going to bring up. Why will it be any different to any other manager? And I feel sorry for future coaches coming into this club, because unless you win the Premier League title in your first season, you're really running into trouble instantly. And I think that's just unrealistic. I think it's unworkable. There's so many conflicting things with this club, and I'll get into this with Tuchel and sort of the profile piece in The Athletic about him, because it speaks about Tuchel as a coach, but also what Chelsea expect from a coach, of apparently wanting us to play some attractive style of play, wanting us to win at all costs, but not allowing a coach any time to embed that style of play. it's just conflicting, and it gets to a point where you think, well, what do you expect in the end? You're going to get bloated squads where I feel pretty average performers this season are being prioritised over the head coach, trying to save face on players that have been mistakes in the transfer window, whether that's Kepa or Arrizabalaga, whether that is, say, a Jorginho even, who's not really a long-term signing, other players too. And it concerns me that the deep-seated culture at Chelsea is one of a lack of responsibility from not only certain players, but also hierarchy. It's always going to be pointed on the coach and only the coach. And if you want to believe that, fair enough, man. Go and read these pieces and make your own minds up. But to me, it's really concerning that this is the culture, and Frank Lampard was trying to change that culture. I think it's going to be almost impossible for other coaches to do it. And yeah, overall, it just paints a quite worrying picture of the culture at Chelsea. And can, say, Thomas Tuchel change it? Can anyone change it? Can any coach come in and have anything beyond 18 months? I think it's very unlikely, at least until something major changes within the club, because I feel like coaches are being asked to do unrealistic things, are being asked to do things, maybe being pulled in different directions, maybe being told one thing by one person and another thing by another person who are in a hierarchy and internal club politics overtaking what's happening on the pitch, because maybe one person in the board backed a certain signing, and because that signing isn't performing well, they're telling Frank Lampard to play him, whilst others are telling him not to play him, but telling him, you've got to get top four and that player's underperforming. It's just so confusing, and it's mind-bending. It really is. And I don't know where we go from here, to be honest, because I already feel sympathy for the next man coming in of what he's going to have to deal with. So yeah, let me know your opinions on this. Please go and read these excellent pieces by some brilliant journalists who report on Chelsea. And yeah, it's concerning. And I think there's many fans discussing these things and sort of evaluating where it went wrong for Lampard. I don't want to sort of say that Lampard did nothing wrong. I criticised him, tactically, in terms of team selection, in terms of the style of play. As I've done, you can go and watch my match reviews back. But I feel to just blame Lampard and to just put everything in a vacuum and say this is just Frank Lampard's issue and just because of Frank Lampard, I think that's very simplistic, and I think these pieces paint that picture that it's much deeper than that. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you did enjoy it, hit the subscribe button and a notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again.